Okay, we're getting serious this morning. Day 5 of our prom week. We're talking sex and teens don't depend on abstinence programs, pledges, or sex education. Sounds, questionable, right? Research actually shows those programs either have no impact or can actually backfire. Yeah, we are getting absolutely serious this morning. Joining us this morning is Dr. Scott Carroll to tell us all about this and how you as a parent can talk to your teen about this really serious topic. So is that true that sex education can really backfire?
Yes, that's actually what the research shows. So abstinence programs, while they may decrease overall sexual activity some, pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases go up, whereas comprehensive sex education programs, actually, while they may decrease pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, sexual activity either goes up or has, or stays the same.
Okay, and why is that? Let's go on abstinence, the abstinence programs. Is it because they're not teaching the kids that they can use a form of birth control? They're just saying don't have sex at all. So therefore you don't have the option or the knowledge of what you can use. Is that?
Well, they may know what to do, but then because their plan is I'm just going to abstain, it's like that box of cookies up in the cabinet, and nobody has perfect willpower. So there is a point of time where at 2 a.m. that box of cookies is going to get eaten eventually.
Okay.
So if you don't have a backup plan, that's what seems to be the effect. So while it does decrease sexual activity overall, then they're unprepared if they're in a difficult situation.
Okay, and I have to ask, I have an 11-year-old daughter. When is the time to start talking to your kids about sex?
About 8 years old is when you should start talking. And part of that reason is because some girls actually start menstruating as young as 9 or 10. So, you don't want them to be surprised.
Right.
But also you have to remember is that because an 8-year-old, you're only going to say a little bit.
So in stages.
Right. You want to do it in stages. It needs to be an ongoing conversation over a long period of time. And part of the things they may not want to know very much at 8, whereas when they're 10, they may want to know a lot more.
When they're 12, when they're 14, and that's what we're getting into. It's prom week right now.
Right.
There are kids as young as 14 that could be going to prom this year. As young as a freshman, being asked by a senior possibly. How do you have that conversation with the 14-year-old, about protecting themselves and maybe not taking that extra step, or how do you even start that conversation? It's very touchy.
Absolutely. So what you're looking for, what we call teachable moments. So it's those moments where the conversation naturally flows to that topic. So, maybe you run into a friend who's pregnant, or maybe, your child is telling you about a friend of theirs that just had a big breakup with their, significant other.
Okay.
So those are, perfect opportunities to lead right into that topic.
Okay. Do you tell them, or is it, I guess, just your preference if you want them to abstain versus knowledge of how to, get a hold of birth control and so on and so forth, or how do you decide which path you're going?
Well, it really is, it depends on the parent. And what we find is that the research says is that the parental attitudes about sex actually have one of the largest impacts on what teenagers do.
Okay,
so,
I can see that.
So if if your personal feelings and values are to abstain, teenagers will often try to respect that. And a lot of times they already know how you feel about the topic even before you bring it up.
Absolutely. And I have a question here. Okay, so we know we've seen a lot of TV shows, reality shows. Teen Mom is a big hit.
Oh, absolutely.
I hear, my daughter's, seen a couple of the episodes. I've heard other kids seen episodes. How do you approach that subject, when you have these reality shows that are kind of saying, yeah, it's okay?
Actually, the funny thing is that the reality show about teen pregnancy has actually done more to decrease teen pregnancy than anything else we've ever done.
Okay.
So it's more effective than anything us as mental health professionals have ever come up with.
Okay, that's true. That's true. Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us. So the message really is start early and start in stages and really have that conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. And